So I guess it's ambiguous.
Yeah, it could be the Septuagint. I don't have the Septuagint here.
Oh.
It just says some Hebrew.
Read 70 men.
Oh, and this one says
Yeah,
that
yeah,
the
yeah.
additional 50,000 in most manuscripts are apparently copyist mistakes.
Yeah, and that's probably why the King James has it that way. Because see, when I read it first, I read the King James, and the King James, remember, only used 3 manuscripts, as opposed to all the manuscripts we have nowadays. So a lot of times these things are just on those 3 manuscripts, on the TR. Okay, yeah, good. All right, but the 70, what there, yeah. When Moses was whining about the load he had to carry, God had him pull 70 elders out and then put the Spirit on those 70 elders. So I knew that 70 did somewhere. Oh, dear. Okay, then we had in chapter 7, there's this mighty deliverance where God sends this thunder and all this horror and rattles the cage of the Philistines, and the Israelites are able to whip them. And as a result of that, they put up that monument called it Ebenezer, that God had been their rock of assistance. Then in chapter 8, they asked for the king. And remember, they knew that there was going to come a time when they would have a king. Because in Deuteronomy 17 and 18, Moses brings that up. And when you ask for a king, and that was the way it was phrased, when you ask for a king, take the king the Lord gives you. And does that fit the pattern? If you remember your reading of Samuel, when they asked for a king, how it came to pass?
I thought Samuel anointed Saul.
He did. But God picked him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, God picked him, and then Samuel anointed him. Chapter 9, verse 10. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow I'll send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him leader over my people. He will deliver my people from the hand of the Philistines. Yeah. So God again points him out, picks this guy. And it's a real troublesome passage because it says in there that the Lord changed his heart and I'll make you into a different person. And so everybody wrestles with, was Saul then, as a result of that experience, regenerated or not regenerated? Because if he's regenerated, then he's in the kingdom, as opposed to not being regenerated and just having been selected by God. So they come down on both sides. Because then God ends up taking the Spirit from. Now, there's nowhere in the Old Testament that I remember where it ever says that the Spirit's indwelling anybody. It's that the Spirit comes upon people, takes quote-unquote possession of them, and makes them do things. But in a lot of the instances, the prophets would prophesy. The Spirit of God would just take control of them. And in fact, in this case, that's what happens with Saul. He's actually taking control of, and I think he even becomes almost naked. He's laying down on the ground in this trance state, prophesying. And then people are saying, is he also a prophet like Samuel? But the actual indwelling of the Spirit doesn't occur until the New Covenant. Okay, so they get him, and then after his failures, then God decides to do away with him. He rejects him as being king, and they anoint David, and that's what we talked about last week. But Eric brought up the fact that Samuel's kind of fearful of going up to the sons of Jesse, and so God says, "Well, you tell them you're going to do this." When actually he had another purpose of going there, and that was to find the sons of Jesse and to anoint David as king. And then most of the book is just spent with David trying to elude Saul, just not wanting to bump him off. And I think I read somewhere there was 7 or 8 or 9 attempts by Saul to kill David, to just do away with David. And then remember there was a tension between Saul and his son Jonathan, and Jonathan's relationship with David, and the tension that went on there. And those two enter into a covenant with one another. And then in 2 Samuel we see where David honors the covenant he made with Jonathan regarding his son Mephibosheth.
Is that how you say that?
Yep.
I wondered.
Mephibosheth. Yeah, and I think I may have mentioned this before. Whenever you're reading the Old Testament, in Hebrew, all the vowels are pronounced. So if you have an AA, it's a. So the correct pronunciation would be Baal, not Baal. It's Baal. Or you'll say it's Pharaoh. It's not Pharaoh, it's Pharaoh. That would be the correct way to say it. They just, a lot of those you get hung up on. But just if you just remember, you got to pronounce all the vowels. You have a diphthong and a vowel, pronounce the diphthong and the vowel, and you'll be able to work your way through. Okay, so then in 2 Samuel, David's anointed king in Hebron. And Hebron's in the southern part of the Promised Land, the southern part of Canaan. And he's down there for roughly 7.5 years. And during that time, there's civil war between David and his branch, and Saul's son Ishbosheth. And Ishbosheth's battle is primarily instigated, it seems as if, because of the general of the army that they had, Abner. Yeah, see, Abner was primarily behind it, and David's commanding general was Joab. And it's interesting to note that when he spends all those years as an outlaw, running from Saul in the cave of Adullam, that most of those guys ended up becoming the strong men of his army as leaders after that. His 30 mighty men and all the rest came during that period of time. And then there are all the things that David did. You know, he plays the madman with the king of Gath and gnaws and foams at the mouth and all the rest. But he's made king over the united house of Israel in chapter 5, verse 12. Yeah, and that's a key verse. Let's go to 2 Samuel 5, verse 12. In terms of perspective on David's part. And David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel and had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. So he was placed in a position of leadership for the sake of the people, not just for him. Okay, and then we have with David, he ends up bringing back the ark after his foolish attempt the first time with the cart. I think we talked about that once before. Then we get to chapter 7 where God then enters into another covenant. We have the Davidic covenant. And he makes a covenant with David. And the context around it is that